This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to Balanced Debate for the Old North State. Well, they're calling Tuesday's election the Sleepy Primary. And we'll ask our panel if this is a legitimate moniker. Our coverage will include all the congressional, legislative, and sheriff primaries to watch. In addition, we'll pose the question a seasoned legislator asked this past week his fellow lawmakers, and that is why legislators are qualified to select judges. Plus, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Joining us on this week's panel are our political consultant, Brad Crone, Becki Gray with the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimom, a political analyst and columnist, and welcome back Andy Taylor as a political science professor at North Carolina State University. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages by our underwriters.
North Carolina spends billions on uncompensated medical care every year. To learn how a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured can help your county, visit careforcarolina.com.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
Let's get started. Well, our friend Colin Campbell with the Insider newsletter is calling Tuesday's primary election the Sleepy Primary because, with a few exceptions, this has been a quiet election cycle. But they're also calling it sleepy because very few voters have actually cast early ballots. We want our panel to discuss the issues, the races to watch, and the candidates in this election. We'll start with Andy Taylor. As we said at the intro, there's some races that are heated, and we want to discuss them in a minute. But let's ask why so few voters have participated in early voting. Is it they don't know or care about the elections, don't have issues motivating them to vote, or the candidates haven't inspired them?
Well, you're right, Tom. You would think it wouldn't be sleepy. We have court-mandated, mid-decade redistricting, which has sort of stirred the pot, particularly in state legislative races, but we're only one cycle away from that redistricting on the congressional side. And there are some interesting individual races, but cumulatively they haven't really struck the imagination, and that's largely because there aren't any big-ticket primaries. It's not a presidential year. We don't have a U.S. Senate primary. We don't have a gubernatorial primary. And those are the contests that really drive people to the polls.
Brad, Donald Trump isn't on the ballot, but I want to know how big a factor do you think he will be in either the Democratic or the Republican primaries?
Well, I think he's going to be a big factor coming up into the November election. So I don't see Trump may be a factor somewhat on a litmus test for partisan purity going into the Republican primary. Clearly, you've seen Trump used as a foil with Democratic candidates, in particular in Mecklenburg and Wake counties.
We're seeing it a little bit with the congressional races as we move forward of some of these Republican candidates. You know, who's going to be chummier with Trump, and on the Democrat side, some of those accusations. But other than that, I agree.
Yeah,
right, exactly. So we are seeing it, but more at the congressional level, I think.
We've been hearing that there was going to be a blue wave this year. And now, I guess the question is, how blue is it going to be? For instance, I mean, the traditional Main Street Democrats versus the Bernie Sanders more progressive wing, and I'm thinking particularly about in Wake County, the county commissioner's race, where we almost have some inter-party fighting going on because a lot of supporters and workers went out and elected 5 new Democrats to take over the majority of the county commissioners. Now they've turned on them.
Well, not everybody has turned on them. I mean, I think there is a battle of a couple folks or a couple parts of the Wake County political establishment that believe they should have done more for schools. They should have passed the folks in office will tell you they've done as much as they can, and that they still increased the school budget. I think this is partially ideological. I think it's partially personality. It's something we've seen in the last few Wake County local elections. Part of this is a local Wake County feud. It's not necessarily as ideological as you think.
But we're also seeing this in the second district congressional race in the Democratic Party. You got three candidates there. Wenda LMA is a transgender who served as a Bernie Sanders delegate in 2016. Ken Romley, who's more of a moderate, mainstream kind of Democrat. And then you got Linda Coleman, a longtime figure in the party, who's got the Congressional Black Caucus. So the Democratic,
a more moderate Democrat, I would argue.
Yeah, and so the Democratic Party is having their issues.
Right, and we see this not only in those congressional races, but really up and down through the legislative races. Chris had mentioned the Wake County Commissioners. That's another area where I think you're really seeing, trying to find what is a Democrat? What do the Democrats stand for? What are the issues that they can win on? I think we're seeing a lot of that testing of the waters through this primary.
But Andy, they're not alone.
That's the big story of this primary. It is the litmus test between the two elements of each party, the moderates and the Main Street folks, and then your more radicals.
Nowhere is that playing out anymore
and your conservative.
Nowhere is that playing out any more than in the 3rd district, where you've got Walter Jones, who has served for a long, long time, who is running against three candidates, Scott DeLacy and Phil Law, who say he's been too moderate. He hasn't been a Trump supporter.
Walter Jones has been in the crosshairs of a lot of Republicans really since the early days of the Bush administration. And famously, sort of Karl Rove and others within the RNC went after him just after the beginnings of the Iraq War because of his positions on that. They've never been able to get him. Jones is very popular in his district. Here's another attempt, really through Scott Dacey, who is
here's the deal there. I said 2 years ago, Tom, Walter's just as tough as train smoke. He is very difficult because of his constituent services. He's always been independent, even since his days in the State House. Dacey has set himself up, though, to be the kingmaker and to come back in 2 years from now.
Dacey's issue, though, is he's being attacked as being a lobbyist for casinos, which isn't exactly part of the Republican base. And I was interested in that and got a lot of attention. Jones also said this is his last run for the State House,
which hasn't before.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, as I said, the Republican Party's been after, even though he's a Republican, Jones for a while. With Taylor Griffin, there have been a number of people who've been sent down to beat him in primaries.
I don't think I'd want to bet against him, would you?
No.
But that's a good example of a race where you have a long-time incumbent, long-established record and what they stand for, and sort of these new upstarts really challenging them and maybe saying, your day's come and gone, it's time for you to move on.
The other congressional race that I think we've got to bring up is over in the 9th district, where we've got Robert Pittenger, who's an incumbent congressman who's running against rerun against Mark Harris. Harris almost beat him last time.
Well, this is fascinating.
I don't get the impression that race is as tight as it was.
Oh, I don't know. It was 1,300 votes last time. Pittenger's had 130. Sorry, Pittenger's had some ethical. There was an investigation. Harris is trying. These are guys who are trying to fight to see who loves Trump the most. What's interesting to me about this race, I don't think the Democrats have the strongest candidate they've had in a long time. I don't know if he'll win, but the more Harris and Pittenger beat each other up in the primary, I think it sets up a really interesting November race there.
It's not a contested primary, but I've got to bring up the fact that Mark Meadows, who runs the caucus, the really conservative Freedom Caucus in the House, had a fundraiser recently in which he invited Vice President Mike Pence to come down. Raised $600,000 in one night. Brad, that's sort of a record, isn't it?
That's real cash. I mean, you can go spend some money with that.
Well, I think because Meadows...
You can buy some time on NC-SPAN.
Meadows is going to be a kingmaker in the Republican leadership contest post-Ryan, whether that be for minority leader or for speaker. Meadows won't be a candidate. I think the Freedom Caucus candidate will be Jim Jordan of Ohio, but that's why he's attracting that kind of attention.
Let's get into some of the legislative races. And to our viewers, I want to tell you we could get as deep into the weeds with this as you would like, but in the interest of time and also in being able to just hit the high spots on this, let's start talking about some of the specific races. Let's start with House District 6. We got Beverly Boswell and Bobby Hanig running against each other, Chris.
This is a very heated race. Bobby Hanig is a Currituck County Commissioner. Beverly Boswell, I would describe as on the far right of the State House. She's got some publicity recently for claiming she was a registered nurse when she's not. She talked about kids eating Tide Pods, which got her national publicity. There was some really hard-hitting mailers sent out on both sides. This is one of the themes, I think we'll get into it, but where we have some Republicans who are known for sort of their I don't know what outrageous statements or behavior being challenged by people who are slightly more into the Republican mainstream, and we'll see this as we go along and talk about some of these races.
The Republican Party had a contest recently as to who was the worst politician in North Carolina. I think she got my vote.
But I think the Boswell race, too, is another example of a first-term incumbent running for their next term for the first time. And a lot of times they are identified as kind of an easy pickup, if you will. So I think that's another reason why that's
House
interesting.
District 11. This one has garnered probably as much news and publicity as any. You've got incumbent Dwayne Hall, who's been accused of sexual harassment, running against Allison Dahl. How's it shaping up?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, but it's a very interesting race. It's the party, the Democratic Party, has sort of asked Representative Hall to step aside. He's not interested in doing that. He's running for the nomination. It's even got some national attention because of the sort of broader context of the Me Too movement. It will be really interesting to see what happens, and if he wins the nomination, whether that actually
be a black eye for the Democratic Party.
Well, and whether they can actually persuade him to vacate it and be able to appoint someone.
Let's keep moving along to House District 14. This is the George Cleveland race. He's an incumbent. He's running against Joe McLaughlin. Cleveland, you might remember, proposed a constitutional amendment change to remove the section that bans secession. He's considered into the more far-right element. What's that race shaping up look like?
Again, the story, Tom, is in the primary season it's a fight between your common sense, practical, middle-of-the-road Republicans and your flamethrowers.
Let's move over to House District.
Just real quick, too, this is an example of a district that has a very heavy military population, and there are pockets of that across the state. And that race looks to me between George Cleveland and Joe McLaughlin. You know, which military person do you want to represent that district?
Let's move to House District 35. You got Terrence Everett and Adam Wright. Interesting race there. Comment on that.
In Wake County.
Wake County. Yeah. I don't know as much about the Democrat primary as I do the Republican primary with incumbent Chris Malone
and Isaac Burke there.
And that's one of those districts too that I see we see across North Carolina, particularly in the urban areas, that the population is changing so quickly. So many people are moving there that what it looked like 2 years ago that elected a particular incumbent may not be that same profile.
All right, let's move to House District 59. You got John Hardister, Mark McDaniel, and Karen Albright running in that one.
Yeah, John Hardister's moved. He's one of the movers. We've been talking about people who've moved residency. Majority whip, you'd think he'd be in pretty good shape, but he's got a former state legislator from the 1990s, Mark McDaniel, running against him. The issue has been sort of on the sales tax. McDaniel doesn't like the fact that the Republicans in the General Assembly have broadened the sales tax. Really interesting race.
Interesting.
That's one of those things, too. The tax thing is one of the issues, broadening the tax base, but overall, we've seen billions of dollars of tax reduction.
All right, let's move to 67, House District 67. Justin Burr, who was the person who has been really spearheading this judicial redistricting, has a pretty hot contestant against him. Wayne
Sasser, he's a pharmacist there, community leader. Both of them are spending a lot of money in direct mail and on digital platforms. Truly a toss-up race.
Chris, let's talk about District 82. That's Larry Pittman's district. He's got Mike Anderson running against him. Pittman, you might remember, is the guy who once compared Abraham Lincoln to Adolf Hitler. He's a leading proponent for giving teachers firearms in the classroom.
I believe he also signed the bill to remove the ban on secession. He's clearly on the far right of the State House. I think he's been, in some cases, embarrassing House leaders, although they haven't spoken out much against him. Although, of all these people that are there, I think he probably has the best chance of surviving in a primary.
So let's move over to the Senate. And speaking of moving over, Bob Steinberg is leaving his House seat and is running in House District 1. That's the old Mark Bassnight seat, you might remember.
Bill Cook
He's running against
left,
Clark Quitty, Clark Twitty
Right.
is running there. It's an open seat. Curiously, the leadership of the Senate is supporting Twitty against Steinberg.
This is curious, and for the Senate leadership to step into a primary, I think is unusual. Bob Steinberg is a very passionate candidate. He was a very passionate member of the House. One of the key issues in that district that Steinberg has taken a real lead on is the prison safety, and been a huge advocate statewide. Yeah, so it's in that district.
Right. He's also been attacked, though, by the right for supporting some renewable energy, the wind farm prominently among them. That's one of the big issues. I think it's really unusual. You have a sitting legislator, he's not in the Senate, but a sitting House member being attacked in a way by the
All right, we got to move
Senate
on
leaders.
quicker here. I'm sorry to rush you along, but let's move to Senate District 34. This is an open seat, been redistricted. You got Bob Rucho trying to make a comeback against A.J. Dowd, who ran once for Secretary of State, Vicki Sawyer, and Bill Howell. How's it looking?
I don't know. Pretty open, I guess. Rucho's opponents have been serving in county level government, so they're well known. There are people. Dowd's come from out of the district as well. There
live
are
in
people.
his funeral home.
Yeah,
The interesting thing in this race right now that I see is all the outside money coming in, the independent expenditures on both sides for Rucho and primarily for Vicki Sawyer.
The other thing that's interesting about that district, I think, is that's one of those where the Lake Norman population is very different than some of those real rural constituents that they have in the district. So that's interesting for a candidate to appeal to all those folks.
Mecklenburg County has some interesting races, including 38 and 39. That's Joel Ford running against Muhaba Muhammad, Roderick Davis, and Tim Wallace. Ford's been very active.
Ford's been attacked because he's a centrist Democrat.
Yes.
And he has several key constituency groups. He lost the African American Political Action Committee endorsement, and the LGBT community has been actively engaged against him. It's going to be a close race, but Ford could be in trouble.
Chris, moving to 39, Dan Bishop's the incumbent there. He's part of the Senate leadership team.
Right.
He's running against Beth Monahan.
Right,
That's
who's been attacked for giving money to Democrats, although she's given money to Republicans too. The big issue in this race is HB2. Her son is gay, and she thinks that Dan Bishop, by his sponsorship and advocacy for HB2, is on the wrong track.
All right, I want to move over to 42 now. This is the Andy Wells seat. And Andy is running against Mark Hollow, Ryan Huffman, and Dustin Long Wells. Andy, again, is part of the Senate leadership team. He's being pretty hotly challenged.
Very hotly challenged. And there's a lot of activity in that district. There's a very highly contested, a lot of interest in the sheriff race there that I think is going to drive some voters out. Strong Republican district, so this is really coming down to Republicans. This is another one where an incumbent member of the General Assembly is being attacked for tax increases because of the sales tax expansion. What they're failing to talk about is overall the massive tax reduction.
Brad, I'm sorry, we got to move faster. Brad, I want to get over to 44. That's David Curtis, and the incumbent running against Ted Alexander and Martin Oakes. Curtis is an optometrist, introduced legislation to loosen the laws to allow optometrists to be able to do procedures that ophthalmologists right now are the only
big
ones that can
article
do.
in the Charlotte O this
boy,
week.
there's been $100,000 or better in independent expenditure money running against him. Is it sticking?
Dee Stewart and Paul Shoemaker have been running an independent expenditure going against Curtis, supporting the eye doctors, and they've been going after him head to tail.
All right. So those are the races. There are a couple of sheriff races I want to talk about, three specifically. In Mecklenburg County, you've got sheriff incumbent Erwin Carmichael's got a primary facing a challenge from Gary McFadden. Any handicapping on that race?
McFadden's a former Mecklenburg PD murder investigator. He's run a very aggressive campaign. Sheriff Carmichael's first term, he's 32 years experience. It's going to be a very close race. Interesting enough, the Charlotte Post, the African-American newspaper in Charlotte, endorsed Carmichael on Friday.
Immigration is one of the major issues that has emerged.
The major issue in that,
All right, in Pitt
district.
County, you've got an open seat there. And there's a very hot Democratic primary taking place there. You've got Paula Dance, Tony Williams, and Bobby Murphy, who are running against each other.
Well, that race is going to be very close. Tony Williams and Paula Dance both coming out of the Sheriff's Department. Dance would be historic in the sense that she's an African-American female if she wins the Democratic Party nomination.
All right, and then in Davidson County, This one's going to be interesting. Sheriff David Grice is running against former Sheriff Gerald Hagee, Greg Wood, and Richie Simmons.
Of course, former Sheriff Hagee is a convicted felon now, which makes it kind of interesting, and particularly in a sheriff's race.
He wanted to put the prisoners in pink, was that it?
And play some sort of, offensive rock music.
So here's the question, will he be able to carry a gun? So, I mean, he has the right to run. Does he have the right to serve?
Andy, I want to get your prediction. What's the turnout going to look like?
Oh, pretty low for the reasons that we talked about earlier on, and it's very patchy. Some of these races in particular areas are going to really light the imagination, and in others where people don't even can vote. I mean, there are places in Wake County where particularly registered Republicans can't even vote. They can't participate.
We're talking about the legislative races. Our legislature seems to be intent on changing both the judicial districts and also the way we select judges, especially in naming juries where there's an open seat. Previously, the governors made appointments, but lawmakers want to name the judges themselves. But a seasoned 9-term Republican legislator, John Bluss, raised what should have been a question to give lawmakers pause when he asked, why are we competent to make this kind of decision on appointing judges? Why do we want to take on one more thing that may not be an area we have expertise when we claim we have limited time and can't get to so many important subjects because of that limited time? Becki Gray and Brad, I want both of you to give us your reaction to John Bluss' comment.
I'm a big fan of John Bluss, have tremendous respect for him, but if not the General Assembly, then who? Who does have the expertise to select judges? Now, this is a question that not only is going around in North Carolina, but it's being discussed across the country. How should we best select judges? Should they always be elected by the people, even for these appointments?
Well, this is for vacancies.
Do you have
this is just for vacancies?
Yeah.
Well, I believe our system right now of having the governor interact with members of the bar and get recommendations and background checks is the best way. It served us well over the past. I think it can continue to serve us well in the future. I don't think the legislature has any business picking our judges.
Chris, the part I think that concerns me a little bit is why haven't they involved the state bar? Why haven't they involved judges?
Because
why haven't they involved Democrats?
This has nothing to do, this is politics basically. This is another example of them taking more power away from Governor Cooper. And by the way, the General Assembly was Republican in 2011. They had a Democratic governor for a couple of years, had a Republican governor for 4 years, and they're just now deciding it's time that they appoint more judges. They clearly want to do everything they can to take power away from Roy Cooper.
Andy, it's pretty well expected that they're going to make some decisions, both regarding judicial redistricting and so far as this appointment process. Isn't it pretty predictable also we're going to see some court suits resulting from all of this?
Well, we've seen a lot, right? We're in a position now where we have divided government. We don't have a lot of history of divided government. General Assembly and the governor are trying to work out the limits of their power, and they've gone to the courts. They've sued each other like crazy on other things, so it's going to happen.
Very quickly, what's your prediction as to what's going to happen in the short session, so far as the judicial appointments and also redistricting?
I don't see them having the political support to go very far.
I don't think they have the votes. I think there's some Republicans who are balking behind the scenes.
Well, and we're supposed to be having judicial primaries coming up this summer, and it was done on the basis that they were going to have redistricting. Well, gosh, covered a lot of ground so far in this show, but I can't leave it without asking you to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimom.
There's been some discussion about whether Amazon is looking at North Carolina less favorably because of HB2, even though we repealed some of HB2. There's some comments. Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest is talking about how the best thing for LGBT people is they can be hired because the economy is doing well. I do think it's worth remembering one of the fundamental issues is in North Carolina you can still be fired. You can marry someone of the same sex, but you can still be fired with no questions asked simply because you're gay. It's a big deal.
Andy Taylor, so tell us something we don't know.
Well, Democrats have their eye on the U.S. House, obviously, in November. According to a lot of observers, they might not even need to flip any of the 10 Republican-held congressional districts in the state to get there, but they've got a couple of good candidates. Chris alluded to Dan McCready in the 3rd, in the 9th, and Kathy Manning in the 13th, who are in
Make it a race. Brad Crone, tell us something we don't know.
Election security across North Carolina, Tom, there are 2,707 precincts. People are worried about hacking into the tabulation system. None of the tabulators in the state of North Carolina are tied into the internet.
Becki Gray, tell us something we don't know.
Selling hot dogs without a license, sending an annoying text and releasing a chicken in the city of Ahoskie are all illegal in the state of North Carolina. And that is only the beginning of all of these crazy crimes that we have. One of the things the General Assembly needs to do is they need to look at this. We need to get a list of all of these crimes that we have in North Carolina. We need to begin to make some sense of it.
All right, I got one for you. On May 16th, the legislature comes back into session for the short session. We understand that the North Carolina Senate is going to roll out their budget before the first day of this short session on May 15th, which means that
it'll be well read before that, I'm sure.
Of course. The body has not participated in that. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we give you the results and tell you who won, how it all played out. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
North Carolina spends billions on uncompensated medical care every year. To learn how a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured can help your county, visit careforcarolina.com.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.